The most dangerous counterfeit in history didn't look fake. It looked better than the real thing. In August 1989, inside a U.S. Secret Service laboratory, a technician placed a seized $100 bill under a microscope and felt something every investigator learns to trust more than training unease. The paper passed. The ink passed. The security fibers passed. Every chemical and mechanical test confirmed the same conclusion: authentic. But instinct refused to agree. He increased magnification to 400 times, expecting to find the usual microscopic defects that separate real money from bad copies. Instead, he found something far more disturbing. The flaws were gone. Lines that should have been slightly blurred were razor sharp. Imperfections the U.S. Treasury knowingly tolerates because they are impossible to reproduce at scale had been carefully corrected. This wasn't counterfeiting. It was optimization, a refinement of reality. In that moment, a realization landed with quiet force: if someone could manufacture money this perfect, then the problem wasn't theft, it was trust. U.S. currency isn't backed by gold or silver. It's backed by collective belief, by the assumption that every bill represents the same shared reality. And now that reality had been duplicated. Somewhere someone had learned how to print belief itself. Thousands of identical bills were already circulating, indistinguishable from the real thing, dissolving invisibly into banks, casinos, and ATMs. There was no crime scene, no alarm, no clear enemy. Just a question that would haunt investigators for the next 2 decades. How do you stop a weapon that looks exactly like the system it's attacking? By the late 1980s, the most dangerous pressure on Seán Garland was no longer surveillance prison or bullets, it was arithmetic. Revolutions don't collapse in dramatic firefights. They suffocate quietly when the money stops. For decades, Garland had lived inside permanent scarcity building networks that survived only because resources kept flowing. Safe houses had to be rented. Weapons had to be moved. False documents had to be printed. Couriers paid officials, bribed, borders crossed. Every ideal, no matter how pure, eventually submitted an invoice. And for years, that bill had been covered by Moscow. Soviet front companies funneled cash through layers of deniability, keeping Garland's world alive. Then the Soviet Union cracked. Phones went unanswered. Transfers stalled. The pipeline dried up. Almost overnight, Garland watched 30 years of infrastructure decay cells going dark, allies drifting away, influence evaporating. He wasn't facing defeat in the romantic sense. He was facing irrelevance. At 60, after surviving things that killed younger men, he was being undone by spreadsheets and empty accounts. Garland was not a man who accepted slow death. He had been shaped by moments where hesitation meant extinction. When conventional fundraising failed, he didn't lower his ambitions, he recalibrated reality. The question forming in his mind was not reckless, it was surgical. If banks no longer held enough money worth stealing, then stealing was the wrong strategy. Money itself was the bottleneck, and bottlenecks can be engineered around. What followed was not desperation, but clarity. Garland understood something most people never articulate. Money is not value, it's agreement. Paper works only because everyone agrees it does. Break that agreement or replicate it perfectly, and the entire system bends. In that realization, ideology met mathematics, and something darker emerged. Garland wasn't looking for profit. He was looking for permanence. And he was about to discover that the fastest way to fund a revolution was not to rob the system, but to become indistinguishable from it. There was only one place on Earth where Garland's idea could survive scrutiny, secrecy, and consequence, and it existed completely outside the moral economy of the West. North Korea did not need persuasion. It needed cash. Sanctions had strangled its access to hard currency, leaving the regime desperate for dollars to buy weapons, loyalty, and silence. What it possessed instead was something far more valuable than money: absolute control. Engineers who didn't ask questions, facilities that didn't appear on maps, a system where failure meant disappearance and success meant survival. When Garland arrived in Pyongyang in early 1989, the country felt frozen in time, locked in a permanent state of wartime discipline. Empty boulevards, synchronized soldiers, loudspeakers repeating loyalty until it felt biological. Garland had dealt with totalitarian systems before. This was different. This was total ownership of reality. The meeting took place in a windowless room inside a government compound across a bare table where no one bothered with small talk. The proposal was audacious and terrifyingly simple. North Korea would print US 100 bills using state resources, industrial equipment, and scientific expertise. Garland would move them through Europe and beyond. Profits would be split. If anything went wrong, the state would deny everything. No signatures, no paper trail, just mutual necessity. The logic snapped into place instantly. Dollars were accepted everywhere. They required no conversion, no explanation, no ideology. Printing them wasn't theft, it was extraction. With every bill that entered circulation, wealth would drain invisibly from the American system. This was not crime. It was asymmetric warfare disguised as commerce. In that room, the decision was made without hesitation, because both sides understood the same truth. If they succeeded, they wouldn't be counterfeiting money. They would be counterfeiting legitimacy itself. Every expert who later reviewed the case would say the same thing: what happened next should not have been possible. Counterfeiting at this level wasn't a criminal act, it was an industrial miracle. Deep inside a restricted military compound outside Pyongyang, a project began that would consume years' lives and vast state resources. This was not a print shop hidden behind false walls. It was a factory built for one purpose, staffed by engineers, chemists, and master engravers working under military supervision. Each worker knew only a fragment of the process. No one saw the whole machine. Silence was enforced not by contracts, but by fear. Failure carried consequences that didn't require explanation. The first obstacle was scale. U.S. currency is printed using intaglio presses, machines weighing several tons that force ink into engraved steel plates with roughly 20 tons of pressure, creating the raised texture you can feel with your fingers. These presses are rare, tightly controlled, and impossible to purchase legitimately. North Korean agents found one anyway, routed through intermediaries in Europe, shipped in crates labeled as agricultural equipment, and installed 2 stories underground to evade satellites. When it roared to life, technicians watched Benjamin Franklin's face rise from the paper in perfect relief. Then came the paper itself. Real U.S. bills are not wood pulp. They are a classified blend of cotton and linen embedded with microscopic red and blue fibers. Replicating the feel, the resistance when folded, the sound when snapped took years of trial and error and foreign mills willing not to ask questions. By the early 1990s, the paper was indistinguishable. The final barrier was ink. The color-shifting numeral on a $100 bill relies on optically variable ink produced under exclusive contracts. Whether through diversion or molecular reconstruction, North Korea solved it. When the first completed bills emerged, they passed every internal test. But the real shock came under magnification. The engravers had corrected imperfections the U.S. Treasury deliberately allows. Blurred lines sharpened, microsmudges erased. Under a microscope, the counterfeit looked cleaner than the original. In chasing perfection, they crossed an invisible line. At that moment, the danger became clear. This operation was no longer about imitation. It was about improvement. And once money could be improved, the concept of authenticity itself began to collapse. The most brilliant part of the operation was not the printing, it was the disappearance. Most counterfeit schemes collapse at the border, where scanners, dogs, customs officers, and chance expose what secrecy cannot sustain. This one never touched a checkpoint. The solution exploited an ancient blind spot in the modern world: diplomatic immunity. Under international treaties, sealed diplomatic pouches cannot be searched by any customs authority anywhere. A bag marked official correspondence moved freely through airports, untouched, unquestioned, invisible. Inside, instead of paperwork, sat stacks of flawless $100 bills wrapped like office supplies. From Pyongyang to Moscow to Dublin, the money traveled cleaner than legitimate cash, never logged, never scanned, never challenged. Once it arrived, it didn't need laundering. It didn't behave like counterfeit currency. It behaved like money. Exchange bureaus accepted it without hesitation. ATMs swallowed it. Casinos converted it into chips and paid out real winnings. Banks bundled it and sent it onward to the Federal Reserve, where it was counted, processed, and redistributed as authentic currency. The bills left no fingerprints because they never triggered suspicion. And then the consequences surfaced in a way no one expected. In the late 1990s, several major Irish banks quietly stopped accepting 100 bills altogether. Not because they could identify fakes, but because they couldn't. Tellers were instructed to refuse everyone, real or not. American tourists were left holding cash no institution would touch. Think about the implication the world's reserve currency rejected in a modern Western democracy, because trust had eroded beyond verification. At that moment, the operation crossed a threshold. This was no longer financial crime. It was systemic contamination. Every supernote diluted confidence just enough to destabilize the whole. There was no dramatic collapse, no flashing red warning, just a slow corrosion of certainty. The system absorbed the damage silently because that is what systems do when they don't know they are under attack. And somewhere inside that silence, the most dangerous realization took hold: when fake money is indistinguishable from real money, the distinction no longer matters. Value becomes fluid, authenticity becomes theoretical, and the crime scene expands until it includes everyone who still believes the system is intact. To stop something that left no fingerprints, law enforcement made a decision that violated every instinct they had. They would not chase the money. They would become it. The FBI and the Secret Service launched the most ambitious undercover counterfeiting investigation in U.S. history, embedding agents deep inside criminal networks for years at a time. These were not short stings or controlled buys. Agents lived fabricated lives with fake names, burner phones, staged criminal records, and histories that could withstand scrutiny from real traffickers. They met in motel rooms, at midnight warehouses, before dawn parking lots lit by a single flickering bulb. Every interaction was a performance where one wrong word could collapse years of work or get someone killed. The goal was patience, not arrests. Each deal was allowed to happen documented quietly, feeding a growing map of relationships that stretched across continents. Couriers led to distributors. Distributors led to intermediaries. Intermediaries led to people who spoke casually about diplomatic contacts and government sources without ever saying the words out loud. Months turned into years. Lives blurred. Agents carried the psychological weight of becoming what they were hunting, knowing that success required letting harm continue just long enough to understand it fully. Slowly, the shape of the conspiracy emerged. A wall at headquarters filled with photos, arrows, names, phone numbers, shell companies. At the center, always just out of reach, was the same figure, never present at transactions, never touching the product, never exposed directly. The frustration was deliberate. This was a network designed to absorb losses without collapsing, to sacrifice pieces without revealing the core. By the time prosecutors were ready, the operation had documented the movement of millions of dollars in supernotes and tied them to a single distribution architecture. It was enough. Raids were coordinated across time zones. Warehouses were hit. Couriers were arrested. Millions in counterfeit currency were seized from suitcases, book bindings, children's toys, and false compartments built with professional precision. After 3 years of living inside the crime, the trap finally closed. For the first time, it felt like the system might win. When Seán Garland was finally arrested in 2005, it felt like the story had reached its inevitable conclusion. After 16 years of surveillance, infiltration, and quiet patience, the system had its man. But what followed exposed a deeper weakness, one no investigation could outmaneuver. Garland was not defeated by evidence. He was protected by borders. The United States moved to extradite him, armed with indictments that carried decades of prison time. Garland's response was not denial but strategy. His lawyers framed him as fragile, ill, and near the end of life. Diabetes, heart disease, possible cancer. The image was deliberate, a frail old man, not a financial saboteur. Courts hesitated. Politics crept in. Jurisdictional limits hardened. While prosecutors argued law, Garland crossed geography. Released on bail in Belfast, he slipped south into the Republic of Ireland, where extradition laws and political sensitivities shifted the ground beneath the case. Hearings dragged on. Sympathy replaced urgency. Supporters reframed the narrative, portraying Garland as a persecuted activist rather than a central figure in a global counterfeiting operation. When Ireland's High Court ultimately denied extradition, the decision landed like a quiet verdict on the limits of international justice. There would be no U.S. trial, no public reckoning, no sentence. Garland walked free not because he was innocent, but because the system designed to contain global crime was still bound by national lines. He returned home and lived out his remaining years in relative obscurity, giving occasional interviews, never admitting guilt, never revealing his contacts, never explaining how far the operation truly reached. When he died peacefully, years later, the case closed without resolution. The investigation had done everything right, and still it lost. The arrest proved something unsettling. Catching a man is easy. Holding him accountable when the crime transcends borders is not. The legacy of the supernote conspiracy is not locked in court records or classified files, it's sitting in your wallet. Every modern $100 bill is a physical admission that the system once failed. The holographic security ribbon, the color-shifting bell, the oversized portrait, the layered microprinting, each feature exists because belief had to be rebuilt at extraordinary cost. Hundreds of millions of dollars were spent not to create value, but to defend it. The counterfeit bills eventually vanished, not because justice prevailed, but because the rules of the game changed. The presses went silent, the ink dried, and the threat evolved. When duplicating paper became too visible, the same logic migrated to code. North Korea didn't abandon financial warfare, it upgraded it. Today, the same state that once counterfeited cash now steals digitally hacking banks, draining cryptocurrency exchanges, moving billions without shipping a single crate or risking a single border crossing. The medium changed, but the insight remained identical. Systems that rely on shared belief are powerful precisely because they are fragile. Money, like reputation, like legitimacy, exists only because we agree it does. The supernote operation proved that once belief can be replicated or manipulated, authenticity becomes negotiable. That lesson extends far beyond currency. It applies to institutions, markets, even identity itself. The most dangerous attacks no longer announce themselves. They blend in. They pass every test. They look exactly like what they are replacing. And that is the final discomfort this story leaves behind. The greatest vulnerabilities in modern life are not protected by force, but by assumption. As long as something feels normal, we trust it. And history shows that trust once understood can always be engineered. The supernote conspiracy leaves us with a hard truth. Americans rarely like to confront the systems we depend on. Don't fail loudly. They fail quietly by blending in. Money institutions, even digital life itself, function only because we trust them without constant verification. When that trust is engineered, copied, or weaponized, power shifts without a single shot being fired. This story isn't about North Korea or one man who escaped justice. It's about how fragile modern life really is when belief becomes the currency. If this made you see the world a little differently, take a moment to support the channel. Like the video, share it with someone who values understanding how systems truly work, and subscribe for more stories that reveal what hides beneath the surface of everyday reality.